Awesome. Welcome to the webinar, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Henry. Just want to give you guys a sense of everyone who's on the line with us today. It's a good lineup, so really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. I think we're going to put on a good show for you guys today, hopefully. So we'll get going. I'll start off by introducing myself, and then we'll have the panelists introduce themselves. So I'm Henry. I'm one of the co-founders of Instinctive. I also head up our sales and partnerships. So I'll pass it off to Trace. Trace, can you hear us? I think Trace is having some difficulties. Meanwhile, Trace gets back on the line. Dr. Augustine.
Sure. My name is Augustin Fu. I've been in the digital marketing industry for about 20 years, and I've spent the last 3 years or so deeply in research of the ad fraud topic. So I'll talk a little bit about that today.
Awesome. Um, Trace, are you back on? Okay. I think her mic is muted. I think that's what's going on. Um, and then we'll also be joined by Dean Murphy, who is the creator of the number one selling iOS ad blocker app in the App Store. We also have Money.
Hey everybody. So I'm Henry's co-founder of Instinctive. Built about two ad networks before from the ground up, and this the third time. So hopefully, we're doing things a little bit better this time.
Great. Um, and Trace will be closing us out with a presentation later, so I'll let her introduce herself later on. All right, so we wanted to start off this conversation not so much looking at the context of whether publishers have the right to place ads against ad blockers or anything like that, but rather looking at how consumers end up getting burned by ads and how that process happens. So it's a slippery slope that starts from excessive and annoying advertising, going to something that's a lot more sinister, to something that's actually illegal and dangerous. And we'll start walking through that process. So we start off with excessive and annoying advertising. This tweet on the left right here is something that we found from Rob Leithern. Rob actually is a former ad tech CEO, and uh, he actually found a screenshot here from IB Times. There's four big banners, top and bottom one, a takeover from Cargo, and then a banner at the bottom. And I think the interesting thing about how the industry has approached this is that there is a certain amount of hypocrisy from certain sectors of the industry. Cargo CEO has been quoted in a lot of articles about ad blockers, but he never cites the fact that he's part and parcel of the cause of the problem of why people are installing these things. And then we kind of veer into things where there's just way too many low quality ads across the board. We'll take a look at that in a moment. And then there's also autoplay video. So when you look at programmatic advertising and the promise of programmatic advertising, I think we all hope that you can find the right person at the right time and get the right message in front of them. But oftentimes what ends up happening is that you're placing, in this case, 21 ads on a page that shouldn't even have advertising in the first place. The ideal situation is, of course, you have 50 companies bidding for that same inventory. So you have a liquid marketplace. But once again, in reality, you end up creating way more ads than is possible or should be possible. And then a big part of it is how broken the current system is. And there are newer technologies like conditional rendering that can kind of help prevent that. So Money, if you don't mind, can you talk us through a little bit of that? Money, can you help us out? All right. So I think he's muted right now. You back there, Manny?
Yeah, Henry,
Hey
just to,
guys,
just
oh,
to,
sorry about that.
uh, yeah,
So yeah, so Henry, just to talk about this a little bit more, a lot of the issues really come around because of the way these ad networks have been kind of developed, and how programmatic has happened and all that stuff. It's really the traditional waterfall approach with JavaScript tags. And originally it was fine when it was one network or two or three that were on a page and everything kind of went through that. But today we see this kind of explosion of layers. We have SSPs, we have ad servers, we have verification vendors, and each tag loads about, let's say 10 more tags, right? And each of them keep loading even more, and you have this kind of exponential explosion of stuff on the page that's really just outweighing the content, right? And that's really the major issue, is that a lot of this has been kind of atomized into too many things, and it really needs to consolidate and become a little bit more streamlined. And we're headed towards that, but unfortunately we're not quite there yet.
It's good to know. All right. So in terms of another kind of thing that kind of pops up is autoplay video. It's especially bad on mobile because it's very heavy. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a graphic that was released from the New York Times last week. They did a study of the top 50 news sites in the U.S. And they looked at the traffic patterns from all of them with ad blockers on and without ad blockers on. And the problem, in many ways, a lot of people justify advertising. I don't think good advertising ever needs to be justified, but a lot of the logic of why advertising exists is that it helps keep content free, right? That's something we keep on hearing over and over again. The problem is on mobile, especially with the data plan, this content's actually very expensive. It actually costs 32 cents to load a autoplay video ad on mobile web, especially from companies that don't utilize the native players of the browsers. It's a very heavy file, right? And so when you look at an ad blocker that costs 99 cents and you compare it to just literally just one page costing 32 cents, then the cost benefit analysis isn't too bad when you look at why people would install something like this, not just to speed up their experience, by the way, because it goes from 33 seconds to 7 seconds, right? But also to save money. When we veer into the darker side of the ecosystem, this is some interesting research we're releasing for the first time today. We were just kind of digging around to see what's going on, like who the bad players are and how they operate. So we start off with something that is deceptive, but not necessarily illegal or harmful to the consumer. So you have the site here. It's encouraging you to download this daily MVP app, but you get bamboozled. It's actually an ad for FanDuel. Then we get into something that's a bit more sinister. So this is, by the way, being promoted by the same company once again, just a different scheme. It's a fake Facebook page, and when you click through, the whole idea is that you've won an iPhone 6. They make it seem like it's a survey, but in reality, you have to collect 100 points, and to collect those 100 points, you have to fill out all sorts of offers. So this is basically a form of affiliate fraud, where you complete all these actions to kind of get something that you're probably not going to get in the first place. I mean, if the company is going to do this to trick you into doing this, they'll trick you on the other end as well, right? And the interesting thing is when we kind of look into the site, the reason how I even came into this in the first place was because of these really intrusive auto redirect ads, especially on mobile. I don't know if you guys have seen some of these where you go to a mobile site and it automatically redirects you into the App Store. A lot of this is a function of just bad code sneaking in programmatically. I would say in certain other cases, the publishers know full well what's going on, and they're just that desperate for the revenue. So now we get to like the really bad, dangerous part of advertising. This is advertising that actually harms the consumer, harms the advertiser, harms publishers, harms the entire ecosystem. It starts off with this story of someone going on CNN, and they see a pop-up for what they think is an Adobe Flash Player update. But the problem is, if you click either of these two buttons, actually, you'll end up downloading a file. This file is malware, It serves two purposes. One, it acts as a Trojan virus. So it allows whoever created this piece of crap to hijack your machine and control it. And I guess a bot is born. And the second thing is that it will also do something that's called ad injection. So it will start placing more ads into your existing browsing experience. So it makes it even more cluttered. And so you have this vicious cycle that starts with advertising and ends with advertising, and everyone's cheated in the whole process. And, we actually found out, one of the companies that's powering a lot of this stuff, this isn't like, at least I can't say that they're necessarily the perpetrators because we don't have definitive proof of that, but they're definitely a core enabler. So this is a company that's based in Madrid. Just to give you a sense of the scale of this operation, this is from their website. September was a great month, 2 billion mobile clicks being sent through the system, 31 million quote unquote cells. And you can actually kind of recognize some of the names here in the ecosystem that they plug right into. And the worst part is the hypocrisy, once again, of these companies. They actually partnered, of course, with a fraud mitigation firm. Uh, I don't know how they get away with this, but of course, you have a press release. On the surface, it looks like they're clean, and in reality, they're helping to perpetuate this malware scam. So now that we've talked a lot about bots and how they work, on some level, I'm going to pass it off to Augustin, who's going to walk us through a lot more of this fraud research.
Okay, sounds great. Let me see if I got control. All right. Yes. All right. Thanks, Henry. So let me spend the next couple of minutes talking a little bit about ad fraud. So we mentioned multiple terms that I'm going to also kind of touch upon, which are programmatic and mobile, ad blocking, malware, and outright fraud. So now let me take a step back and put a little more context to it by talking about some of the trends that led up to where we are today. So if we look at how ad fraud has grown up, so over the recent couple of years, we've seen a dramatic rise in the use of programmatic advertising. And programmatic is necessary, and it's also good, and there's also a lot of promise to it. And it's really, if you see the evolution on the right-hand side from 1995 to 2005 to 2015, where we are today, the number of sites that carry advertising has grown exponentially, from hundreds of major sites that carry ads to thousands of blogs to now millions or tens of millions of these long-tail websites. So when you have so many of these long-tail websites that are very small in and of themselves, you need very large ad networks that aggregate a large number of them together so that advertisers can place ads across all of them programmatically. But because of this rise in the use of programmatic ad networks, we also see a corresponding rise in the amount of fraud. So the portion of digital ad spend that is now being placed through programmatic is growing, and as you can see on the bottom of that, we also see that red line going up. And furthermore, we see a huge divergence in the estimates of the amount of fraud. So it used to be pretty consistent, right, from 30% to a range of 17 to 29%. And more recently, we're seeing a much wider range. Some people say it's 3%, other people say it's 57%, and I've seen estimates that go even higher than that. So needless to say, the amount of fraud that's impacting ad dollars, digital ad dollars, is continuing to go up as the amount of digital ad spend goes up. So let's look at where the spend is actually going. So if you look at these four main buckets, right, we generally know there are banner ads or display ads, there's mobile display, there's video ads. Most of those things work on a CPM basis, right? Advertisers pay on a cost per thousand basis. Then we have a bucket called CPC advertising, and most of that's search, that's desktop search, but there's also mobile search, and those are paid on again on a CPC basis. And then we have the third and fourth buckets, leads and sales. But if you look at just the first two buckets, impressions and clicks, those represent about $42 billion out of the $50 billion of ad spending. And those are by far the largest two buckets. So the bad guys are also smart guys. So they basically stick with the two buckets that have the largest amount of dollars from which they can steal. So you'll see that those first two buckets represent about 86% of the digital ad spend. And so the bad guys are going to be focusing their attention there. And if you look across all industries, pretty much no industry is immune from these problems. So on the left-hand side, you have retail and finance, a lot of whom do banner advertising. And then on the right-hand side, you have pharma, travel, and consumer electronics. And those are typically doing a lot more search-type advertising. So, you know, the ad fraud for those particular industries are also over-indexed. So again, as you can see, there's a red column for every single industry, so no industry is immune from this. But you know, I'm still getting a lot of questions about what exactly is ad fraud. So let me take a step back and define that. So if we just focus on those first two buckets, there are two main kinds of ad fraud. The first is impression fraud, and the second is search fraud. So those correspond to the two largest buckets of digital ad spending. And there's some common features to both of them. So as you can see, both of them require fake websites to be set up. So the bad guys can set up thousands upon thousands of these kinds of websites for the purpose of carrying these ads. So you can imagine for banner ads, they can set up a website, load up tons and tons of ads on a page. And like Henry was saying earlier, sometimes we see 5 ads on a page. Sometimes we see 21 ads on a page. You know, I've seen a case where there was 151 ads on a page. So basically, because these are fake websites and because very few humans actually go there anyway, they can carry enormous numbers of ads per page. And then the second thing that they need, the second ingredient to all this fraud is bots. And so again, Henry mentioned that a little bit before, but bots are basically automated browsers. And these are browsers that developers used to use to test their app or test their website before launching. But because of that, they can automate what the browser does. So there's really no human actually controlling each browser. It's not like a human using a browser to visit a website. These browsers are created by the millions, and the bad guys are controlling these browsers and telling them to go to websites to cause web pages to load, and therefore to cause these ad impressions to load. And that's how they can cause the kind of ad fraud that we're talking about here. So it's impression-based fraud. So all they have to do is cause the ad to load, and they get paid for it. And then the second kind is a search fraud, which is a little bit more complex because it takes two actions. The first is to cause the ad to load, and the second is to click on the ad so that they can earn the CPC revenue. But we can focus on the simpler kinds first, which is the impression-based fraud, and it covers display ads, mobile display, as well as video ads. So we'll get to that in a second. And there's many kinds of browsers that can be automated. These are just examples of the ones that are most frequently used. You'll hear some of them called Phantom.js. There's one called Zombie.js. So again, all of these are browsers that the bad guys can automate by the millions so that they can cause fraudulent ad impressions to load. And then similarly in the mobile space, there's not only malware, but also these mobile simulators that can be used to cause more and more ad impressions to load. So these bots come in all sizes and flavors. Some can be very simple in that they just cause an ad to load, or some can be very complex where they can fake mouse movements, page scrolling, loading of apps, clicking on things. And so you'll see there's many different kinds, right? We did touch upon malware. We do have JavaScript-based bots, and then sometimes the toolbars themselves can do things in the browser that the human is not aware of. So again, there's many different kinds of bots, but all of them are used to commit this kind of ad fraud. And it's been very well documented over the years. So these are a couple of cases I'm citing from the ANA White Ops study from last year. From display ads to video ads to source traffic, you'll see varying degrees of fraud. So in that study, they said video ads have about a 23% incidence of fraud, but also other studies have observed that rate to be even higher than that. So let's just spend a few minutes on video ad fraud. So if you look back at ComScore numbers from 2013 versus 2012, so this is a case study that's pretty straightforward, so I'm just choosing this to illustrate the problem. If you look at the blue bars and if you look at the red line, the hours viewed per month and the number of unique viewers is relatively flat going from 2012 to 2013. But despite that, if you look at the number of video ads viewed, there's actually a 4x increase just within the calendar year of 2013. So that makes you wonder, how could the number of ads have gone up by 400% when there's pretty much the same number of viewers looking at video ads and the same amount of time spent looking at videos? Well, I think a lot of that can be explained by fraud or the possibility of fraud. And there's also another piece of evidence here to say that video ads are about 10 to 20 times more lucrative for the bad guys to focus on. So if they have bots that cause banner ads to load, they might earn X. But if they have the same bots go cause video ads to load, they might earn 10 to 20 times more than that. So obviously you can see the motive behind some of the ad fraud. And so video is not only the fastest growing area of digital advertising, but it's also the most lucrative. So the bad guys have the most incentive to focus their time and effort on that. And so Henry pointed out a couple of examples. I have a few more screenshots here to show you. Some of these videos are, there's 5 or 6 of them on the page. All of them are set to autoplay. And so on and so forth. And there's even more egregious cases where there's hidden videos or videos placed in one-by-one iframes. So all of those are eating up bandwidth, slowing down your browser, and all playing behind the scenes without the user even knowing. Or in some cases, as we mentioned, the bots are causing them to load. So if you just take one example, so this was one case that TubeMogul reported on in 2014. These were 3 botnets that they were able to detect and shut down. But just look at the sheer numbers of these things. If you look at the total video ad views in March of 2014, it's about 29 billion ad views. But out of that, you'll see the fake video ad impressions come out to be about 88 million per day. And if you calculate the amounts per month, that's about 2.7 billion. So if you just take that straight ratio, these 3 botnets that were detected and shut down by TubeMogul accounted for almost 10% of all the video ad views in March of 2014. And if you do the simple back-of-the-envelope calculation in terms of the dollar impact, that's a very large amount of dollars that were wasted in the course of 1 month in March. Okay, so these are just examples that have been documented and written about over the years. So all that being said, what should we go do about it? So both the advertisers and obviously the media agencies have been taking steps to fight the fraud. But the question remains, why hasn't this been solved already? So short answer is that it's actually more complicated than it seems, right? So a lot of times when the ad networks and the media agencies start using the industry bot lists, they'll come up with a relatively small number of bots or percentage. So you see on the left-hand side about 3%, 2% to 3%. If you match against these industry lists, you're certain to get very low percentages of bots. But any programmer or any technology person will tell you that there's about 10,000 bots, so literally orders of magnitude more bots out there that have been observed in the wild. And all these things they range from, again, the simple bots to the more complex bots, and sometimes you can even call them good bots, like the search crawlers that come to index your website. So there's many, many times more bots out there than are accounted for in some of these industry lists. And the other big thing is that big red circle on the right-hand side. So the bad guys' bots are actually not on any of those lists, because what they do is they do everything they can to disguise themselves. So they call themselves Internet Explorer, Chrome, or any of these popular browsers. So it's actually very hard to detect because those names, the user agents, are not on any of those industry lists. And so that's why typical programs, so this is an example from Google Analytics or Google AdWords, when you just filter against those bots, filter against the industry list, that's good, and everyone should be doing that, but that's not enough. Because if you look on the right-hand side, this is an example of a bad guy's bot. It says it's Internet Explorer, so it doesn't tell you it's a bad guy bot, right? So there's many, many times more of those going around to cause this kind of ad fraud. So bottom line is the bad guys bots are not on any of these industry lists. But if you look closely, and we have a tool set to measure this, you'll see the difference between confirmed humans, honest bots in the middle in the yellow, and the fraud bots. So if you just take a moment to look at the middle section in the yellow, you'll see the user agent. In this particular case, the bot says, I'm Googlebot 2.1. I'm coming to index your site. So those are the legitimate bots, but nonetheless, they are a bot. And so supposedly the ads or the video ads should not be shown when those bots are visiting the website because the advertisers expect their ads to be shown to humans. And then finally on the bottom you'll see the way the bots, the fraud bots look. So as you saw that example before, they declare themselves to be Internet Explorer or Safari or Chrome and not, they don't honestly declare themselves. So given that, when we can detect the bots coming to the site or causing the ads to load, we can really see a dramatic difference. Like if you look at the one on the left-hand side, we'll see that 90%, 93% of the ad impressions were caused to load by bots. So when you see that, the mitigation is not really that difficult. You can actually go blacklist those websites that are sending an inordinately high amount of bot traffic. But the main point is to actually do that on a consistent and constant basis, right? You have to keep updating your blacklist to keep up with the bad guys. So in this case, this is what I mean by the mitigation doesn't necessarily need developers or any kind of sophisticated technology or statisticians. There's some basic, straightforward things that both the media agencies and the advertisers can do to mitigate the bot problem. And this is a great example of how one client was able to just month after month continue to clean this up so that you'll see that the ads are now being shown to more and more humans, which is the blue line, and the ads are being shown to less and less bots, which is the red line. So again, over time, you can actually see them cleaning up the inventory that they buy. And then in this next example, you'll see the blue area, which is the amount of confirmed humans, go from 10% to 20% to 30%. And as the percentage of humans that actually get to see the ads continue to increase, then you're going to see a corresponding increase in the number of goal events. Right? So these are kind of conversion events or goal events that you can actually measure on your own website using your own analytics. So given that, again, the point is there are some baby steps, there are some things you can do right away without having to deploy sophisticated technology to not only help you detect, but also help you mitigate the bot problem and some of the fraud that we've seen. So if I were to summarize some of the recommendations, again, coming out of my research and the work that I do for clients is, don't panic, right? If you see some bot percentages, in the 60% or 90%, those are, cases. Those are industry examples. But what really matters is the amount of fraud that's actually impacting your digital ad spend. So the key is to not panic, but also not be complacent. And what you really should be doing is measuring the amount of fraud that's impacting you. And then really pay attention to the details because, again, in your own analytics, you'll probably see examples where there are sources of traffic that have 100% bounce rate or 0 time on site. So some of those things can get cleaned up or should get cleaned up right away. And then finally, a key recommendation is to start to evolve your KPIs to focus more on the things that are not easily faked. Right? Too often I see big brands still use metrics like the number of impressions, the number of clicks, or the number of visits to measure how successful their ad campaigns were. but those things are very easily faked, as we've seen before in the previous slides. But if you focus on conversion events like purchases or other things, other human actions that occur on your website, those are less easily faked, and also the bots have no incentive to fake them. Those are the key metrics that you should optimize your campaigns around. So with that, I'll hand it back to Henry, and we'll take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Thanks.
All right. So you can find out a little bit more about Dr. Augustin. Do you have a website, Doctor?
Yeah, actually, anyone can reach me at augustin.fu@gmail.com, and in my opening slide, there's my email address as well.
Perfect.
Thanks, Henry.
Yep. And we do have time for Q&A, so if you have questions, just feel free to type them in, and we'll kind of go over them at the end.
Cool.
Cool. So next up, we're actually going to talk about ad blockers. So we kind of transition back into the dark side of advertising. I think you've just seen how dark it can get. And now we're talking about current trends. So we'll start off with desktop adoption rates. In the US, it's at 9%. In parts of Europe, Poland, which is not on this graph, I think is actually up to 40%. So I think we're at an inflection point here in the US specifically, especially with the launch of ad blockers on iOS. And we're going to talk with Dean Murphy, who's the creator of the #1 selling ad blocker. So I think you guys will enjoy this. So just give me a sec to load this. Dean and we recorded a conversation last week, and we're presenting some new research. So I think this should be pretty interesting.
Thanks so much for making the time. I would imagine that's been pretty crazy for you these past couple of weeks.
I've been busy in my spare, well, I do this all in my spare time, you see, at the moment, so I'm not used to this kind of attention.
What's the story behind building Crystal?
Started when Apple done their developer conference back in June, I want to say, a few months ago. One of the tools they made for developers is the content blocking extension for Safari, so developers can make content blocker apps, and that just really appealed to me because the mobile web has frustrated me for a long time, for I don't know, for a couple of years now, just how it's getting slower and slower and slower. So I've just done a little experiment and wrote a blog post about it, and the blog post got very popular, and then I decided to turn it into a full product, and here we are a few months later.
From your perspective, you mentioned that the mobile web is getting slower and slower. What's your take overall on advertising as someone who's built an ad blocker? I mean, do you hate all advertising across the board?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I love a lot of websites that are supported by adverts, and without adverts, they wouldn't be possible, essentially. So I'm not against advertising at all. It's just certain kinds of advertising I'm very against. Like a popular one on mobile is when you open up a page, as soon as you touch it to scroll up, it automatically just throws you into the App Store to download an app. Just throws you out of what you're doing, just without no interaction at all. You haven't pressed anything. That's just very infuriating when that happens. And then there's like autoplay videos, which they're annoying on desktop, but even more so on mobile, where you've got limited bandwidth or slow bandwidth for your mobile data plan. I think one particular website loads like a 9 megabyte video, which is a lot of data when it's come down onto your phone. I mean, if you're scrolling like several pages, that's like 30, 40, 50 megabytes. It's going to be loading every time you join that same site. Just going for articles. That's my hit, really. Just stuff that slows it down completely, and it's very heavy and not very friendly to the device, to mobile devices.
And I think that what you're referencing is that New York Times article that just came out earlier this week. I think that 9 megabyte file ends up costing like 30 cents. I guess in the context of that, paying like $1 for your app isn't actually that bad of a trade-off for a lot of people who usually don't want to pay for anything on the internet with the assumption that everything should be free.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, ideally, people would want to pay the websites they want to support. Pay them $1 a month, for example, to not see ads, or a few dollars a month not to see ads. Not a lot of websites offer that kind of model at the moment, so that might be something worth looking into. I run a survey on my users to see what ways they'd like to support their favourite websites, and around 20% of them didn't mind paying their favourite websites directly to either remove adverts or for extra content that complements their website. So 20% of the user base is potentially wanting to pay money. Isn't that bad a deal, really?
Now, that's actually pretty interesting you bring that up within your set, because we also conducted a survey against 800 people nationwide in the U.S., essentially asking them, and this is a theoretical thing, but we said if you had an all-you-can-eat $9.99 plan, like Netflix essentially, right, for the internet, would you go for that? And actually, the percentages that came back were 91% of people said no, and 9% of people said yes. I guess it depends on how you want to read into it. I think the primary takeaway from our perspective is clearly the 91% no number says that the majority, at least from, I guess, a people perspective, will still want free content, right? Now, having talked to other publishers who actually monetize on a subscription basis, they actually tell me that 9% is actually a bit higher than the number that they were expecting. And certainly, you know, a lot of companies that currently run subscription models have lower percentages of that when you look at, you know, how many people out of the visitors to their site are actually paying subscribers. So I think the model, the subscription-based model, might have some legs, but I think on a larger scheme of things, the majority of people still don't want to pay for content.
Definitely, yeah. The majority won't want to pay. The ones who pay are more valuable because they're paying a lot more than what they would.
Of course. I'd also say the flip side of that is if you look at the web as a whole, a small blog, even a very specialized blog, how many subscribers will it take to make up for what it could have made off of some ad revenue, even if it weren't that much, right? And I think the monetization problem is actually a larger issue, right, as to why this whole thing has kind of evolved. In terms of the technical side of things, can you explain to the audience what can you block with your technology, and is there anything that you can't block?
Basically, most of the stuff I block is just served over JavaScript files. So I block the calls to external domains. So, for example, if I load up your webpage, example.com, and it makes a call in the background to googleadverts.com, I can block that googleadverts.com connection from happening, so it just doesn't contact the advert servers directly at all. Just cuts them out of the equation. So that's basically what it blocks. It blocks domains. I can block individual files, individual images from loading at all. Or it can hide elements on the page as well. So if we can't block them, you can always hide the elements via CSS.
Here in the States, CBS and Hulu are kind of known for this. They set it up so that you can't really avoid their video ads even with ad blocking. If you have an ad blocker on, they'll just kind of play white space for 30, 60, 90 seconds just to tell you, you're still going to have to wait even if you don't launch an ad. How does that work on mobile, in terms of things like pre-roll that take up a lot of time? Are you able to block that as well?
A lot of the time, no. A lot of the pre-roll I can't seem to block. It either blocks the video completely or allows the advert to get through. So a lot of that can't be blocked. One example is cnet.com. So they put a little banner up saying, when you try to play a video, it says you're using an ad blocker, we can't show you this video unless you turn your ad blocker off, or something similar to that effect.
There's a company called SourcePoint, which is supposedly developing technology that's supposed to fight ad blockers. Like, what's your take on that? Have you seen this technology? Do you think there's long-term viability for solutions that are geared towards defeating what you're developing?
I know there's some technologies involved where stops the end user accessing a page at all, and that's kind of like a very strange point because you're stopping someone from getting into your site. Either they're going to do what you want and turn your ad blocker off, or they're just going to decide that the content isn't really worth looking at for them, or they can just find similar content elsewhere. If it's like news content, especially, it's so heavily circulated through loads of different websites. If you can't find it on one site, there's lots of other sites that are serving a similar story.
That's interesting in terms of the impact of deploying those solutions. You're essentially saying, well, the internet is an open web of information. They'll find it somewhere else. So you just end up losing as a publisher if you're pursuing that as a primary strategy.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, it sounds very horrible to say, but like there's hundreds of news websites, and
right.
You know, if a story happens, it's going to be everywhere. Like you can just type it into Google, and like the first 5 links will be 5 different news websites reporting basically the same source, essentially, more or less.
This is actually pretty interesting. 70% of your users actually are fine with advertising as long as it's not intrusive or annoying. Did you get a chance to kind of check out what we do? Do you have any opinions on our formats? Would we be, I guess, acceptable within the definition of what a good ad would be?
Yeah, I'm quite a big fan of native advertising, personally.
Well, it's good to know. Excellent. Your app has been released. I know it was near the top of the App Store, so congratulations on a successful launch.
Oh, thank you.
How do you see the long-term momentum playing out for ad blockers? Like a significant drop-off since it's kind of been announced, or has it been pretty steady in terms of adoption? And I ask this because I was just at Advertising Week, which is a conference out here in New York. The team at Vox said that they think the issue is overblown and that they've only seen a small number of users even using these tools right now. So I just wanted to hear like your perspective.
Yeah, well, I think it's safe to say my app is probably the most downloaded worldwide. It was it hit 32 countries as #1 spot and about top 10 in 50 countries worldwide on the iTunes App Store. I'm not going to share specific numbers, but I'm going to say it's less than 500,000 downloads in total. When you compare that to the the install base of iOS, it's a very tiny fraction of users of downloading ad blocker, I would say. Once you take into account all the other ad blockers, etc., I think it's well under 1 million that's actually been downloaded in total.
Wow.
So when you compare like the install base of iOS,
right.
I think it's a very small problem, especially when you consider that these ad blockers can only work in Safari. So I think it's a very overblown situation where everyone says like the end of the mobile web and stuff like that. I think it's very just overestimated, basically.
In a way, you kind of agree, but you're also saying that it's still early days because the adoption rate so far it's just been out, so it's just barely starting, right?
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time, Dean, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah, that's all. You too. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good luck with the webinar.
All right. So hopefully that was an interesting conversation for you guys. So going back to the ad blocker issue to continue this, I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but Howard Stern recently discovered what ad blockers were. So let's listen into his response, a reaction.
Ads on the internet. Like now, whenever I go, like someone sends me a YouTube clip, the only place I ever see commercials is on like YouTube because I got to sit through 30 seconds to see this clip.
Right.
You got to get ad block, man. You got to what?
Ad block. You can get it for your browser or whatever, and it'll just knock out all the YouTube ads.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it'll go straight to the clips?
Yep.
Oh, dude.
I've been using it.
How does I've got all kind of IT people. How do they not know
about that? Huh?
It's really easy to download, but I've been using it. It skips all the ads. It's amazing. It's
Gary, contact my IT person and tell them I want that.
So I don't think we all have IT people, but certainly I think the incentive is there. So where does that lead us? Well, I don't think that all ads will be blocked. I think that what's clear from Dean's research and of course from the charts that we just showed you is that it's an opportunity right now. If anything, I think it's some consumer feedback essentially saying that the formats have to change. So much of this has actually been around video if you think about it. I think from a larger perspective, we have to think if just forcing someone to watch our brand's videos are the best way of spending those dollars and getting that to happen. I think Augustine's research shows that this excessive demand for that type of format is driving a lot of fraud in the marketplace. Another thing that's kind of interesting is you have to realize that we're moving from a web that's gotten slower to slower. We have to move that to something that's faster and faster. All right. We also need to get to a place that's a lot more uncluttered. Here at Instinctive, we have what we call the 1X challenge, which is that we're challenging the industry to only serve one ad per page. That's something we've been committed to since we started, and we hope that everyone else will do that as well. And I want to make sure that I'm actually sharing my screen again, so I just told about that. And we also want to make sure that the ecosystem is free of scams and viruses and not intrusive or annoying. So when you think about, those solutions, one of the ways we can kind of broach that issue is to look at fast native content platforms that are using instant article technology. So Facebook is launching instant articles. I'll have Facebook kind of explain that in just a second. Apple is also doing the same thing, and we've done it for the past year. If you think about what we all do as platforms is that we take content that lives outside of where the wall already is, and we bring it in to where the consumer already is at. So they don't have to leave their existing environment to consume these experiences. And Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook kind of tells us why this is important.
Instant articles are a program we have going on with publishers in beta, where we are having publishers natively upload their content to Facebook. And the reason we're doing that is that news is something that a lot of people on Facebook are engaged in. Half of Americans will consume news on Facebook any week, and more millennials. But the problem is that it loads really slowly when it goes out of the app. So our average is 8 seconds. It's the slowest experience in newsfeed. Ready? So let's try 8 seconds. Okay, that was 4, and it was super painful, right? So we all know what we're like on our mobile phones. I'm done by that. A lot of us are done by that.
So in terms of that, we've developed our instant article technology for over a year. Money, can you kind of speak to, your motivations in doing it for advertisers?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing really for a lot of ad block users is performance and security and privacy, and a lot of these things are because of this usual approach that we use for ads, which is clicking out to a destination, right? Most users don't know where they're ending up. It just takes time to load. Again, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, because there's so many tags and so many just ads on the page, it's just very slow, right? And like Sheryl said, 8 seconds is a long time to wait just to get a piece of content, especially if you're going to read that content faster than the wait time. So what we've done is actually bring a lot of technology to kind of replicate this kind of instant article experience across the open web, right? So we syndicate content straight to the publisher page, and the user just clicks on it and consumes it where they already are. It's already preloaded, and it takes it's very instantaneous, and it's also a full experience. So they're not clicking out to some other destination. They're actually getting the entire sponsored, whether it's video or article or any other kind of content, right in front of them, and it's super fast. There's no wait time. There's no extra tracking or issues that are involved. And we know just how important speed really is because there's been so many studies done about it. Not just putting aside the ad block issue, we've seen Google, for example, and both Amazon as well. Both of them said 1 second load time increase on Amazon's page led to 1.6 billion in revenue lost, right? Google, half a second has led to almost a 1% drop off in clicks on their search page. Like people were leaving the search page because it was too slow. So it's a massive difference, and at their scale, I mean, it's a big thing. So it really matters, the speed today, especially on mobile devices that are smaller and on mobile connections, is really important to make things as fast and as seamless and as instantaneous as possible, because users, their attention spans are getting shorter. They're getting more savvy with, like we also mentioned, right? There's so many other sources to go to that if you're not loading, they're not going to come back to you, right? It's over. You kind of lost that opportunity to show them your experience.
Awesome. So to kind of delve more into a use case of this, I'm going to pass it off to Trace, and I'll pass the screen.
And just to let you know that that's great. Thanks, Henry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. And can everybody see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Super. So thanks for that intro. My name's Trace Cohen. My most recent role was head of global digital marketing for BlackBerry, now focused on digital and content marketing, specifically independently, but wanted to share the story really around native and how we'd leveraged this in the role of BlackBerry, and kind of why I believe it is such a necessary way forward and such an authentic way forward for brands. The story of BlackBerry is really the story of a brand that had a story that no one wanted to listen to, right? So BlackBerry was a brand that was, as we all know it, as sort of, quote unquote, failed device brand in terms of having had massive market share, and then, reduced to, pretty insignificant market share. But at the same time, what was happening was that the brand had really reinvented itself, and under John Chen's leadership, who's a brilliant strategic B2B focused guy, really reinventing the brand around its early DNA, pillars of business and productivity and security. And yet when we went to the media to tell them the story, that we were a company that had a different story to tell, really no one wanted to listen to that story, because the story they were listening to was the story that even at that time was, probably about a month old. It was the story that BlackBerry had put itself up for sale, and that the media believed that BlackBerry was, BlackBerry was dead. And as you can see from these headings, this really was the story that was told out in the world. And the sort of typical way in is that it's really the role of comms and your PR team to pitch sort of more updated story. But I even recall being back in a Reuters meeting way back. It was kind of around the time of the Twitter IPO, and writers wouldn't write the true BlackBerry story because BlackBerry stories were getting even more click-throughs than the Twitter IPO story, right? So you just continue to get these kind of types of sort of end of BlackBerry, rip BlackBerry, BlackBerry is dead stories. So the strategy had to be that we create our own stories, and that we actually, own the news, so to speak, in terms of getting to authentically tell our story, and a brand really was core to the brand's DNA, being the sort of pillars that it was founded on, and a narrative that was believable. And really introduced John Chen as the storyteller that the market had faith in, as the person who could then kind of step up and say, actually, we're not dead, and this is what we're about. Moving beyond just being a device play, to sort of start to talk the broader pillars of the brand, what it stood for, what it was about. And the strategy became, very clear very quickly. While BlackBerry had a very strong social following, in the tens of millions, actually a titan in the social world, we had less strength in the sort of, in the actual content that we were creating, kind of creating rich media content that was very focused on this news story, on this B2B story, so to speak. There was a content program in place, but it was less focused on this. So it was about bringing in top tech journalists. Eric Lai joined my team, who had a stellar media background, really a reputable tech news journalist, and built a team under him that became a 24/7 newsroom, telling that true BlackBerry story, and kind of doing it through two ways. One was the sort of content creation, and the other piece was the content amplification. So content marketing, while it was a buzzword everywhere else, shall we say, was really not a kind of trendy decision. It was something that we needed to do to be able to survive as a brand, and kind of built out a kind of a story engine, so to speak, which was building in strong collaboration internally with our teams in terms of cross collaboration between brand, between comms, between content, clarifying what the story was we wanted to tell, selling that story, pushing it out through both owned and earned media, and then leveraging both social channels, right? The shortcoming of social channels being that although we had millions of users, kind of organically those algorithms obviously don't work in your favor. In feed, really allowing us to be able to get to where our users are, to where they are natively consuming content, to where it is relevant to them, and to be able to kind of start to tell stories. So again, going back to what the pillars of our brand were, and writing really interesting content. So whether it was stories about Obama leaping off of Air Force One to race back to the White House where he left his BlackBerry, or about Angela Merkel agreeing to have BlackBerry, secure devices of the German government, or David Cameron saying that, no problem going on vacation. He could run the country from his BlackBerry, right? These were all stories that mapped to the pillars of our brand. Also allowed us at the time that it was happening to be able to publish the content and then to deliver that out. So really using our blog in this kind of example, the blog as the kind of key place where the content was created, and then as Mani was describing, publishing that in feed, in context where users are, so that they could, so that it has a different kind of relevance. And if you look at this particular example, this is from Instinctive. Thanks, guys, just showing the sort of exact examples of how we would take something and then both publish it internally, but then also publish it, whether it was on Variety or on BGR or one of hundreds of publications that we could target users very specifically to be able to get that content to the relevant audience. There's a similar example here with where we focused on productivity as a key, using this guy, Sujit Kundu, who's a all-up productivity guy, always on the go, always using his BlackBerry, but again, using it in context with the user-initiated instant video. And these are really, real and magnificent results. What we found out was that people did want to hear the BlackBerry story, and it just, we probably, if the Reuters guys knew what the kind of, what the response rates would have been, it would have been a different story, literally, right? But we have, Nielsen studies that shows that those were that were exposed to our advertising. We saw an 88.6 lift in brand lift specifically, right? And that in terms of average article read time at around 75 seconds, which is phenomenal, even when you think that the average ads, what they're actually even created, sort of way that we think about attention spans is that they're 10, 15 seconds, but actually, 75 seconds became the average article read time. So just some really phenomenal stats showing the relevance of it. And, I think that I actually just put a kind of fun slide here in terms of talking about branded content or native content as being the true nature of advertising. There used to be an old adage in the sort of ad industry world that would speak to the fact that every copywriter had a script in the bottom drawer, I guess in the days in the bottom drawer, right, somewhere filed on their computer, that every copywriter was really a wannabe screenwriter. And I think that the real boon for the industry around ad markers is that it does get us back to creativity. It does get us back to strong content. And the fact that there are a lot of phenomenal talents and artists out there that want to be creating content and that do create good content. Examples here, the Lego movie, which is obviously a Lego product, or if you look at the Art of Flight created by Red Bull being a brand that is Red Bull Give Wings, a lot more than just the drink itself, but very much they've been focused strongly on content marketing. So I know that we're reaching the end of our time. My name's Trace, and this is where you can reach me. If you do reach me on LinkedIn, if you could just shout out that you were on the call, on the Instinctive call, so that I know to follow on to the conversation. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. So yeah, I know we're out of time, so thank you so much everyone for joining us. If you guys can stick around for 5 minutes, we'll answer any questions anyone will have with all the panelists on the line. Feel free to type in anything you might have right now, so I'll give it 1 or 2 minutes. While we wait for the questions to come in, this was actually pretty interesting stuff, Trey, so thanks so much for sharing that. I think from a larger perspective, how do you feel that brands should kind of dip their toes a bit more into content, right? Shifting from just creating banners and videos into creating content experiences for consumers.
I think that it is exactly as we said. I mean, I really would use BlackBerry as a stellar example, and I think that it really is. Brands have to authentically know themselves, what their values are, what they stand for, and from there create rich content that only a brand can own, that is purely ownable by them, right? Because, if you look at brands like, say, Nike or Dove or Always, each of them has a unique story to tell, and I think it's really about authenticity.
That's great. And Augustin, just out of curiosity, from your perspective, with, let's say, like, all the fraud gets cleaned up in the marketplace. This was actually something that was kind of brought up last week at Advertising Week. I was covering a 3-hour panel on trust in the ad industry. And actually, the CEO of White Ops actually brought up a good point. He said, well, right now, everyone's metrics kind of looks great because of all the fraud that's helping juice a lot of those numbers, especially with display and video, as you've shown. So
Yep.
Once all that is cleaned up and supply severely gets restricted and prices go up, do you think the industry can deal with that price increase?
Yeah, I think it's really about shifting to the right KPIs. So one of the last points I had in my recommendation slide was really to focus on those KPIs that are directly tied to business impact. So as long as brands and advertisers and the media agencies continue to focus on the tonnage metrics, like the number of ad impressions served or the number of clicks or number of visits, all of these things will look like it's going to cost more. But if you think about the amount of ads shown to bots right now, so regardless of whether you believe the number is 60% or 10% or whatever number in between, if you take all that into account, that's an enormous amount of dollars being wasted. And if you take that all the way down to how many sales did I get for the number of ad impressions served and the amount of cost that I paid for those ad impressions that weren't served to humans, then the cost per acquisition is going to be very, very high. And then later, if you actually clean up the fraud and you actually end up showing your ads to humans, your cost of acquisition could actually go down. So it's more efficient from a business perspective. So right now, the easy metric that everyone still talks about that's easy to report on is the number of ad impressions, the number of visits, and things like that. So I think the cleaning up of the fraud and kind of evolving past this stage of hyper growth is for all of us in the industry to actually start focusing on metrics, that have more to do with the business impact rather than the tonnage of ads served. I think that's going to go a long way to, helping us clean up the fraud as well.
That's great. And I'll just add, as a parting thought, from our perspective, we're focusing a lot more on attention-based metrics and time-based metrics instead of just tonnage-based metrics, as Augustin just mentioned.
That's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I know we're a little over, so I apologize for that. And send me a note. Let us know what you thought about it, and hopefully we'll do a few more of these. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Great. Thank you very much, Henry.